curate and program. So thank you for joining us this morning. So glad you could spend some time on your weekend to join us and learn something new. So I want to give kind of a big shout out and thank you to our Tampa Bay Library Consortium. They actually fund this program. So without them, we would not be able to do this. So thanks to them, and also thanks to the Polk County Library Cooperative, Jennifer Kovac, who's in this meeting. She does an amazing job running things behind the scenes. So thank you to them for letting us all have a peace of mind and making sure things are going well. So some housekeeping rules before we get started. During the presentation, I'm going to ask that you keep your mic and your camera off. So go to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen and just make sure that you've got a red slash through your audio and your video. It'll just help kind of mitigate distractions so we can all focus on the presentation. If you need closed captions, you're going to go to the bottom of your screen and click the more with the 3 dots. And then you're going to click the captions button. So that'll help you if you need closed captions. For questions, we're going to do those at the end of the presentation. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will ask at the end. And then also, again, at the end, if you want to do questions, you can do that as well. And finally, this presentation is going to be recorded. So thank you, Christopher, for that. So you'll have the opportunity to view it up to 30 days after. And finally, I want to introduce our speaker today, Christopher Bryant. He has dedicated the past 20 plus years to his work as a professional genealogist, writer, editor, family heirloom preservationist, historian, lecturer, oral historian, reunion planner, cemetery researcher, and transcriber. A multi-talented man, and we are very honored that he's here today. He's the founder and researcher of C.D. Bryant Genealogy, LLC, as well as a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, Arlington Genealogical Society, and Dallas Genealogical Society. He specializes in African American, Native American, and Hispanic history and culture, while also analyzing DNA to assist in uncovering family mysteries. He's also an active volunteer for Find a Grave and transcriber of new records that are recently digitized. So we are so honored to have Christopher join us and spend his time with us this morning. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Christopher so we can all learn something new.
Thank you, Ms. Shannon. I appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Bryant. I am the sole researcher and founder of C.D. Bryant Genealogy. Family history has always been something that has always interested me. I spent a lot of time around both sets of my grandparents, and being at their houses, you would see an influx of family members that would always come in, grandparents on the phone, talking to family members that had moved away. So family was always around. And I was always that curious little boy at the family reunions trying to figure out who everyone was, exactly how we were connected. One of my fondest memories is, I believe I was about 8 because my little brother was a little baby. We came home from church and I grabbed the church bulletin and I sat down on the floor in front of my grandparents and asked them specifically, what was your mother's name? What was your father's name? What were your grandparents' names? How many siblings do you have? And I took that information and went home and typed it up. And I still have that document to this day, definitely over 25 plus years old. So as I've been researching, I have found that certain ethnicities have more of a difficult time finding information and tracing them. And one of those happened to be not just African American, but Native American as well. So today we are going to dive into Native American research and see how we can overcome some of those genealogical research challenges. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So today we are just going to try to understand the complexity of tracing Native American ancestry and explore some of those ways to overcome the challenges using genealogy and genetic methods. Some of the common challenges that we face when researching Native American ancestry is that there was simply just a lack of enrollment into the tribe. Many of our ancestors for whatever reason, chose not to. They relied heavily on oral history. And as those elders pass away, so does the history. There was a lot of forced relocation, name changes. The tribal enrollment process could be very confusing, mixed heritage, and also DNA. So we'll dive into each of these individually. So the lack of enrollment into the tribe, many Native Americans did not register for the nation, primarily because they chose to pass, as you would say, um, in that they just identified as a mulatto person, or they identified as a Black person in the census. For whatever reason, many people chose to protect themselves because of the racial discrimination that was taking place. They chose not to identify as a Native American. So, in not doing that, they lost out on a lot of opportunity. There was a lot of distrust of the government. They did not feel that the government had their best interests at heart, so they were not willing to go and fill out the application. They just didn't trust the process. Many people were unaware. When you think about it, there were a lot of Native Americans in the South. So in those rural country areas, there was not a lot of communication unless it was word of mouth. So it took some time for that information to trickle down to those people that were in the most remote parts of areas. And so they just weren't aware of all of the things um, that were available to them. Displacement and disconnection from their tribal lands. That's one of the things we'll dive into next. But the Trail of Tears was one of those things that literally just displaced people from their homeland and forced them to move to other places. And during that time, you had a loss of family members. Some of the family members stayed behind. Some of them died along the way. So there was a lot of the history that was lost at that point. There was a lot of marrying of non-natives. So, for example, you would have a native man that would marry an African American woman or a European woman, or you would have vice versa. And in doing that, a lot of the Native um, Americans again try to pass and hide under um, a non-native label. And also the fear of racial ramifications for identifying as a Native. Just as there were ramifications for African Americans, slavery, it was the exact same thing for Native Americans as well. Native Americans relied a lot on oral history, but I want to remind you that oral history is not just the genealogy, but it's also the stories, the spiritual beliefs, and the entire culture of uh, the family. So insight into some of these relationships between the people. I know, for example, my family, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather was a storyteller, and there were a lot of stories that he told that had been passed down to him for generations. And when I would ask specific questions, he was like, well, I can't quite remember, but this is just what I was told. And so in those stories, there were family members' names, there were places that they lived, there were other ancestors with their names were passed down. So they didn't necessarily rely on written documentation a lot. It was just those stories that were passed down. In this oral history, there's also a preservation of the perspectives, the truths that were excluded from the colonial records. So in those documents that were government standards, there's a lot of an ethnicity or there is a lot of a certain group of people that is not documented. So the only way for them to be able to preserve those things is through the oral history and passing that through each other. In this oral history, there weren't a lot of specific dates or the proof needed to validate that they were African American. For example, I have an elder in my family. She is 89 now. And she called me one day and she said, I just remembered this. She said there was a rhyme that was in the family. in the year that Uncle Eli died. That's how they kept track of different things that happened in the family. So there wasn't a specific date. She just told me in the year that Uncle Eli died. So I had to take that information, go back and try to find when did Uncle Eli actually die, and then go through the family to see what could have transpired during that time. Also, there were misinterpreted, this oral history was misinterpreted by someone from the outside. If you're not a part of a particular culture, you may not fully understand what a lot of these things mean. There were terms that were specific to a specific group of people. And so an outsider would not necessarily understand or know the details behind this oral history. Excuse me. There was a lot of forced relocation. So we talk about the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This act authorized the U.S. government to grant lands west of the Mississippi to the Native American tribes. So it was taking all of the Native American tribes that were on the East Coast and pushing them to the west side of the Mississippi River. So in this displacement, it forced a lot of the family that migrated, it forced them to leave some of their family that still stayed behind. Um, and a part of this was, which a lot of people are aware of, the Trail of Tears, and that we know that resulted in thousands of deaths due to disease, starvation, exposure, and exhaustion. Name changes. Names changes is one of those things that is kind of across the board. If anyone has anyone that has immigrated into the United States, there was kind of an Americanizing their name, so making it more American. So if someone's name was Soaring Hawk, he may have been forced to change his name to John Hawk or Hawkins. There's also a spelling and variation, uh, spelling variations in that it is based on the pronunciation of the person giving the information and then how the recorder is receiving that information. For example, when the census records were taken, this was firsthand. My grandmother would say they would make them stand out on the porch and then they would yell the information to the census taker that was standing in the yard. And it was based on their dialect and then his level of education as to how that information was documented on paper. So that's why you have a lot of misspellings of last names. Well, not misspellings, but different than what is currently used or what was used previously because of the fact that it was based on the interpretation of the person recording the information. Um, Marriages to non-natives. So let's say Whispering Wind married into the Smith family, but the only documentation may say a native girl marries John Smith. So her entire identity is lost in the fact that she was only identified as a native girl. The tribal enrollment confusion. So each tribe had different requirements and criteria that you must meet in order to enroll into the tribe. So some of the tribes required the blood quantum, while others required the lineal descent. So you just had to find an ancestor that was listed in the tribal rolls and then show that you descended from that person. And then there was also the overlapping of tribes. So the tribes were migrating, moving. I'll give this example. I was doing research for one of my clients, and she wanted to know which tribe she specifically belonged to. And in doing the research, she belonged to a smaller tribe. Well, a larger tribe came in and overtook this smaller tribe. So they killed the men and took the women as their brides. And so now the original DNA per se of that original smaller tribe is now being mixed with the larger tribe. So after a few generations, there could possibly be no more traces of that original smaller tribe. And so The overlapping of these tribes, it causes a lot of the dissipation of the DNA, which then takes away from the ability for people to be able to enroll in the tribe because there's no true evidence of the fact that their specific tribe even existed. That leads me to mixed heritage. So as the Native Americans were mixing with the Africans, the Europeans, and the Hispanic lineages, as I previously stated, um, the identity of these people was based on the interpretation of the person recording the information. So as we look, like in the census, you have a person listed as Black, mulatto, and colored. Those are all classifications of a person of color. But for example, I have ancestors that are listed as Black in one census, mulatto in another, colored in another. In one census, they're even listed as white. So what were they truly? Um, but excuse me, this caused a lot of confusion because then it also dissipates the DNA and makes it very difficult to trace because when you're looking at these people, you're wondering if it's the same person. If you see their name that is close to what their name was in the previous census, and now you see them listed as white versus Black or mulatto versus colored, it kind of makes it very difficult to understand if this is exactly this the same people. Geographic and cultural overlap. So you have the Africans, you have the natives, you have the Europeans that are living close together. During slavery, there were African Americans that lived close to their slave owners. And so in these Africans, you also had mixed race natives that were living as well that were disguised as slaves. And so living close to the Europeans, there were some of them that actually had children by the Europeans. So intermixing of the races, intermarrying of the races, few generations down, where is that Native American ancestry? Has it truly been lost in this? In DNA, DNA is a challenge, but as we'll see later, it can also be a benefit. So one of the challenges with DNA is that for said ancestry DNA, they identify Native American ancestry as Indigenous Americas. It's very vague. For those of you that have seen this listed in your ethnicity composition, it just covers a portion of North America. It's not specific. It doesn't really tell you exactly where you come from, but it does give you that Indigenous Americas, which we know, okay, we have Native American ancestry. And then with this, the DNA segments, the DNA becomes very diluted. It's small to begin with, but then it dissipates with each one of those generations. And so you may only have 1% of this Indigenous America or 2%. So it makes it very difficult to be able to understand exactly where that 1% may have come from. Now, Ancestry has where it tells you maternal and paternal. It could be that you have 2% of Indigenous Americas, 1% comes from your paternal side, 1% comes from your maternal side. That's very difficult to try to be able to trace and understand exactly where they came. So now we're going to talk about some of the resources that you can utilize in Native American research to be able to help you further understand and connect to your tribal roots. Interviewing family members. This is something that I have tried to use across the board. I have been very successful with some of the elders in the family because they're able to provide a detailed context to some of these events that are recorded. Case in point, my grandmother had, those will be her first cousins. When I interviewed them, they were both in their 90s, two sisters. And I asked her, I said, I wasn't able to find you in the census. I know you're alive, but I wasn't able to find you in the census. And she said, no, that's because I lived with my grandparents down the road. I worked on their farm to help them because they were older. And so sitting in front of her, I went to the census and boom, there she was living with her grandparents. So if she was not able to give me that added detail, I may not have even been able to find her if I did not think to look at her grandparents on her father's side. They'll also be able to give you um, lost or unrecorded information. So some people went by their middle name, they went by nicknames. There are um, in these stories, the places that they lived. I have my grandmother's first cousin. She told me here recently that their grandmother would wear moccasin shoes. She would wear the tribal dresses. And this is something that I had never heard before. So this would be one of those things that interviewing this family member uncovered some of the tribal affiliations that I was completely not aware of. You'll also be able to obtain letters, photos, and family Bibles, or even journals. And I have been fortunate enough to obtain photographs that I'll share with you at the end of this presentation that truly depict people that look like they are definitely of Native American uh, descent. Another thing that you can do is examine vital records. Um, I truly was not aware that people even identified themselves um, as Native American in these records. I thought it was only in specific Native American records that were from the tribe. But this is a birth certificate from someone that was born in Texas, and their birthplace is listed as the Indian Territory, USA. Now, this is not specific, but it does give you an indication that this person did, in fact, live in Indian Territory. In the 1930 census, the United States federal census for Panola County, Texas, this family identifies themselves as Indian. And as you see at the bottom of the page, column 12, there are various classifications of people: white, Negro, Mexican, Indian, Chinese, and Japanese. And so as you're researching, looking in detail at the ethnicities of the people could be a true aid in helping you with your research. This is an example of a World War I draft registration card. And on this document, this gentleman identified himself as Indian. This was the first time that I saw this. That's why it sticks in my mind. Um, Not Native American, but he identified himself as Indian. So when you are looking at draft registration cards, um, definitely make sure that you are looking and utilizing all of the information that is available to try to help you in your research. This is an example of the Dawes Rolls, the Freeman Rolls for the Chickasaw Nation. And so working with one of my clients, I became very, very familiar with this document or these documents. And on these documents, it lists the person, um, it lists their relationship to the main person listed, their ages, their genders, their tribal affiliation, and who they were a slave of slash sponsored by. And so in this document, you'll also see number 2. Mandy Johnson is the mother of Calvin and Andy Black on the Chickasaw Freedman card 147. So just looking at this card will give you additional information of the people that are listed on this card. So for example, if this person is close to marrying age on this card and they're listed in the home with their parents, but then shortly after they are married and they apply, they would then have their own card. And then the notes from the new card would then be applied to this old card. So it is literally bouncing from one card to the other, trying to connect all of these dots. but there is a plethora of information on these cards. And if you look at the back of this card, it will give you the name of the father of each of the people that are on the front. It will tell you if this person is alive or dead. And then it will also tell you if this person was a non-citizen and who the owner was, who they were connected to, um, and the name of the mother, as well as her tribal affiliation as well. So these Dawes Rolls cards definitely have a lot of information. It may take a while to sit down and go through all of this information to try to untangle, but if you are fortunate enough to find your ancestor in this document, you will definitely be able to find enough information to be able to connect yourself to the tribe. This is an example of an indexed version of the Native American application for enrollment for the 5 civilized tribes. So in this document, I was surprised at exactly how detailed it was. It asked them the question, what is their name? How old are they? Um, what is your name on the roll? What is your name? What is this? Of the Choctaw Nation? What are the names of your children? How old are they? What is your father's name? Is he living? What is your mother's name? Are they members of the tribe? Are they freemen? I mean, it just gives a wealth of information. In one of these documents, I was able to find 3 generations worth of information just in this one document. And so, again, if you are fortunate enough to be able to find your ancestor uh, in these documents, you will definitely have a lot of information. But it's just a matter of being able to dig through all of these thousands of applications to be able to find your ancestor. Excuse me. And it may not list your ancestor as the head person. Your ancestor may be listed as the sister of a person that this application is for. So if you see someone that has the same, excuse me, has the same surname, it may benefit you to go and look at that document just to see if you have any other familiar names that are also mentioned as well. This is an example of an Indian census roll dated between 1885 and 1990. These are available for Oklahoma, Montana, North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota. These were just some of the ones that I was able to find for the tribes of the Comanche, Apache. And so in this document, if you look at the red arrow, it actually shows you the degree of blood. Though we know that the quantum is no longer one of those accepted options in most cases, this will give you some insight as to exactly how close they were to being a full-blood Native American. So if you look and you see a person that's an eighth, okay, I have an eighth, but I need to go back 4 more generations, 4 more generations to be able to find that full-blooded ancestor. So that's one of those things that we have to utilize any clue that we're given in any document to be able to help us with that research. This is a record for the Eastern Cherokee tribes, and it's just an index copy, but it gives you a wealth of information. To the far right, there is an excerpt, and it says that this particular person, Harriet R. Miller, was rejected from the tribe. And it gives you the reason why. Applicants or ancestors were never enrolled. It does not appear that they were residing within the Cherokee domain um, and have no known recognized members of the tribe. So in these, it will tell you if the person was actually admitted or if they were rejected from the tribe. I have seen many instances where a person has been told they are of Native American descent, but when we find them, they had been rejected from the tribe because of the fact that it was not them specifically. They married into a person that was a member of the tribe. So they were rejected, but those children were accepted because of the fact that their other parent was of Native American descent. For those of you that are ancestry.com users, these documents can easily be found if you go to the search field at the top and go down to card catalog. And in the title section or keywords, you can type Native American. A lot of these documents will populate for you, and you can go through these different categories. For one, there's like over 45,000. There's 68,000 for another. There's over 100,000 for another. So there's a lot of these documents that are here. Will you be able to find your specific ancestor? That is always the goal. But it is not a guarantee, primarily because of the fact, as we mentioned before, a lot of our ancestors did not register um, for the nation for their specific reason. And so that is still truly the most difficult reason as to why furthering our Native American research is so difficult. Now, I mentioned that DNA was one of those challenges, but um, now that technology has advanced, DNA could actually aid us in some degree. So we know that the autosomal DNA test will provide you with just the indigenous America um, category, ethnicity, along with the percentage. But there is Family Tree DNA. That is another company that provides the Y-DNA, which are for males only that trace that direct paternal line. So there is a strand of DNA that is current in myself that is unchanging in my father and his father and his father's father on back into time. And so if there is Native American, if it originated from Native American ancestry, this test will be able to tell you that because it will provide you with a haplogroup that is primarily Native American, has Native American origin. So this will be something that will be able to show you that, okay, I did originate from Native Americans. Now I have to try to find documentation to prove that. Family Tree DNA also has the mitochondrial test, and that is for males and females, and it traces the maternal line. It does the exact same thing as the Y-DNA, but it traces that maternal line. So because I do have, excuse me, the X chromosome, I am able to trace my mother and her mother and her mother's mother and her mother's mother's mother on back into time and to see if there is any of connected to a haplogroup that originates from Native American descent. Um, Again, this is one of those things that it won't hurt to try. When you don't know, I say try everything, just in case this is the thing that actually gets you the information that you need. DNA is also one of those things that bridges the gap with the paper trail. When we are looking at documents, black and white, that is just a snapshot in time on that day of exactly how things were. But we don't know what happened outside of those parameters. Were there other marriages? Were there other um, children that were born? Um, is the paternity actually the correct paternity that is shown in the census? I've had instances where I've looked in the census, it shows a husband, wife, and their 12 children. Okay, one big happy family. But as I started looking at the DNA, there were a lot of half kinships that were at play with some of the descendants of those children. Why are they half kinships? Because they only share one parent versus the full kinship where they would share both parents. So upon investigating, I found out that the husband had been married 3 times and had 2 other sets of children that were living in the house. And she had been married previously and brought children into the relationship. So it was a house of blended children. So as you're researching, you have to make sure that you truly understand the dynamic between the mother, father, and those children, or anyone else that is living in that house. I had an example with a client. He told me he was from Native American ancestry from his father's side. So I traced back his father's line. Sure enough, there was a man that was of Native American descent. The thing was, he was my client's great grandmother's second husband. My client descended from the first husband. So all of the children from the first husband were not of Native American descent. All of the children that descended from the second marriage with the husband who was of Native American descent then had that Native American ancestry. And so he was surprised uh, to find that out. He was just told that that's where the Native American was. It was, the Native American ancestry was there. It was just not from his direct ancestor. So truly, it is important in understanding exactly who you biologically connect to, so that you're able to go down the correct path when researching. DNA also connects you to DNA matches. In finding these DNA matches, you may find someone who is more connected to those Native American roots. Perhaps they grew up on the reservation. Perhaps they grew up with different stories than what you were privy to. And so communicating with these people will give you more knowledge about your tribal connections and perhaps further you in your Native American research. I had an example that just looking at the DNA matches, I saw people that I had known all of my life, but had no idea that we were biologically connected until I had my great aunt take the DNA test for me. And so I know there's some people that don't like the DNA test, but taking the DNA test will remove all doubt of anything that you have regarding parentage, ethnicities. Some people grow up thinking that they're 100% Irish. Turns out they're Scottish or something else. It's just DNA just gives you the whole truth every single time. No ifs, ands, or buts. And so I feel that DNA is that solid foundation for your research. And then you are finding documentation to then fill in, to validate everything that you're seeing in the DNA. Now, we know that DNA is now not an acceptable um, method of being able to obtain tribal enrollment. So the tribes now require that you find your ancestor in one of those Native American roles and then show that you are descendant from that person. So you have to find a document that shows almost pretty much a birth certificate or a wedding certificate that lists the parents so that you see the child and the parents listed, or a death certificate, so that you are seeing each of those connections from one generation to the next. Other databases and online collections, Family Search, I know that they are in the process of adding additional documents to their database. But as they are adding new documents, they are creating pretty much like Ancestry, a card catalog. So you can search through the catalog and find various documents. The National Archives are also a good place. A lot of the Dawes Rolls and the tribal rolls, those are found there at the National Archives as well, just as they are on Ancestry. Ancestry.com is another, and Fold3 is another place to find this information. Ancestry and Fold3, they are they do have paid subscriptions, and you pretty much have to purchase the subscription in order to have the full view of their database. National Archives is not, in Family Tree. Both of those are free. And please keep in mind, after you have obtained all of this information, this is one thing that I definitely try to do is to create a documented narrative of your Native American ancestor. So even with any other ancestor, any ethnicity, I try to build a timeline of this person from the time that they were born until the time that they died, and then fill in as many tick marks as I can uh, in that person's life. Um, this is definitely going to help you in um, connecting to various locations. Some people say, oh, we are of the Cherokee tribe, but in fact, you're actually of the Choctaw tribe. And that's something that you found out by tracking the people. Yes, they were born in uh, or lived in Cherokee territory, but they were actually born in Choctaw territory. So, in building that timeline, you're able to track where they lived, where they were born, and then where they died. You can also compare the information that you receive from the oral stories with that in the documentation. So both of those go hand in hand, taking information from the oral stories and then validating them with documents and vice versa. As I stated before, my grandfather was a storyteller. Um, without going into too much detail, one of our ancestors was a very colorful character, and he ended up in prison a lot. And my grandfather would tell me this story, and I was like, that can't be true. Like thinking back then and people in prison, it just did not resonate in my mind as a little kid. And as I was digging through the research, I found the prison ledger with that particular family member's name and all of the times that they were in prison, and it was two sheets full. So there was truth in those oral stories that were told by my grandfather. And now I have the documents to validate that oral history. Please also include any DNA results that you have that connect you to this Native American ancestor. It will just help you be able um, to find that information um, if you are to try to enroll in the tribe. All of this information is something that you would definitely have and that they require on the application. If you find a person that is more knowledgeable of your tribal connections, all of the tribal histories, or any of that documentation that you find or obtain from another person, please include that information as well. And then provide citations so that you're able to go back and look at that information if you need to, or if someone is trying to verify the validity of your information, they're able to utilize those citations to go back and do so. And so I hope I have given each of you something that you can use to help further your research. And now I guess we'll open it up for questions and answers.
That was great, Christopher. Thank you so much. And I wanted to say too that for Ancestry and Fold 3, I know for the people that are joining us locally, the History Center does have that available for free if you come into the library. And I know a lot of public libraries, I know we've got a lot of people that are outside of Polk County. So I would recommend everyone, if you do not have the option of subscribing to the Ancestry and Fold 3, to check your local library because they will potentially offer that resource for free. So I just want to add that in there for those interested. But does anyone have any questions they'd like to put in the chat or raise their hand? We'll wait and read them out. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we had a comment. We've got some people watching in here that some churches also would be a good resource to your local churches if you want to check there. Um, Lots of thank yous and wonderful presentations, Christopher. Anybody got any questions? And what I'll do too after this presentation is I'll send out Christopher's information and website, so y'all go check out his website. We have a comment that says, suggestions for further research for my great-grandmother who appears in the Indian census from 1886 to 1889 with both her native/non-native name. So what are some further steps potentially? Do you have any suggestions?
Okay, so are you trying to trace her back into time, so find her parents, grandparents, or are you trying to use that information to connect yourself to the tribe? Because if that's what you're trying to do, you've already successfully done that. If you know her relation to you and she is listed in a tribal document, then you now just show how you descend from her, and that is your connection.
Yeah, I think you said that, she just commented and she said that she disappears from the census rolls after that, that period of 1886 to 1889. So maybe he wants to know more about the family. So probably after, or before that census record, she can't find her. So what would be some good ways to
Um,
go about it? A
so
complicated
there could,
question.
yeah, so there could be a lot of different reasons why she disappeared. Um, she could have passed away, or she could have remarried, or she could have changed her name, or there could be various spellings of the name. And so that's why you're not able to find her information. Okay, she married in 1897. I feel like she has to be there. It's just one of those things where sometimes you have to take the last name out and just search by the first name in the specific area where you know that she lived, or vice versa, take out the first name and search just the last name. Because sometimes if you have a Mary Jane Smith, in one census she'll be listed as Mary, in one census she'll be listed as Jane. So there'll be different first names, but it's the same person. Or you have the Mary, Martha, Margaret scenario where those names have been used interchangeably throughout the census records. Um, I see you're continuing to give information. If that's something that if you want to go to my website and go to the contact us and just send me a message, and then we can talk about this, and I'll be able to try my best to give you some more insight.
Yeah, and I will send out the link to Christopher's website, so everyone has access to it, and you can go check it out. Well, and if no one else has any other questions, I want to give a big thank you to Christopher for taking time to present to us today, and everyone else for being here and spending your morning with us. A wealth of information, and I think it'll be great moving forward to see kind of with the progress of the digital realm and the digitization, how records become more available. Okay, we have one more comment that says, it was interesting your comment about members being, I think, rejected from the tribes. Dr. Howard mentioned this habit in her book about the Black members not included in the funds, fund monies, I think is what she means. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, um, even in the Dawes rolls on the actual cards themselves, there will be a huge red stamp that says rejected. And so on those cards, it may not necessarily give you um, the specific reason, but in that index version, I mean, it kind of spells out exactly why the person was. If it was one of those things they weren't tribal, but their spouse was tribal or something of that nature. And also keep in mind the amount of records that are digitized is not even a dent in all of the records that are available. I know that there are some states, there are some counties that have not yet digitized all of the documents that they have. So sadly, that means that you're going to have to take a trip and go to those local jurisdictions, those courthouses, those historical buildings, and look for those documents. Microfilm is another resource. Here in Dallas, I literally spent an entire Saturday going through microfilm, just looking at all the documents that are available. So just because you don't see it online, that does not mean that it is not available. Try to contact that local county where they live. Start with the Genealogical Society, try with the Historical Society, and they may already be familiar with that surname or that family that you're trying to find information with. So reaching out to them would be a good start to try to find those documents that you can't find online. So don't give up.
Okay, amazing. Thanks everyone again. And this is going to be actually our last speaker series of the year. So Christopher, you're ending us on an amazing note. I know, mic drop moment. So I will see everyone back here in January. Y'all have a good holiday season, stay safe, and have a great rest of your weekend. So bye everyone.
All right, bye. Thank you, Shannon.